Biden has finally done it. While America was distracted with the Trump show trial, we had Biden that gave Ukraine the A-OK to use U.S. weapons on the Russian mainland. This is a move that the United States has resisted thus far, because providing weapons that will be used to strike Russia is such an obvious major escalation. And don't buy these bullshit headlines that are trying to paint the picture that somehow Biden was pressured to do this. This has been a strategy that NATO has been doing since the beginning of this conflict. The United States would draw a red line. A bunch of U.S. proxy goons in Europe will push the United States to change their red line, and then Biden would fold under pressure. We've seen this so many times. Quick question for all the NATO psychopaths. How does allowing Ukraine to strike into Russian territory change the trajectory of this war? It does not. The same way that sending the M1 Abrams tanks and fighter jets to Ukraine didn't change the war. Once you realize that NATO and the West, their only goal is to boost military-industrial complex profits and not win, everything starts to make more sense. The West has been very open about the fact that they are using Ukraine to test their weapons. Now they're trying to see how well their long-range weapons does against Russia. Joe Biden and the West are willing to risk World War III for a boom in the military-industrial complex. So, Nick, who do you think is winning the war between Russia and Ukraine? Raytheon!
What's poppin', my friends? Let me put that back up again so you guys know what this is really about. Yeah, well said. There's so much really well said explanation there. I'm glad that you touched on a lot of those things, and that's why a lot of people, and if you haven't, make sure you guys subscribe to Danny. This is exactly why you're seeing a lot of success, because the wealth of knowledge and the explanation behind the moves that the empire is making. That, and we have so much to cover. We can do this forever, but I want to make a few shout outs real quick because we still haven't touched Gaza yet. So we gotta touch on that on a second. I want to read this super chat by John. Thank you for the 999, John. How can the younger anti-war left in the United States build solidarity with each other and solidarity with the axis of resistance internationally to contain the older warmonger imperialists in the United States? Now, I was going to save this. Let's see, how should I do this? I was about to save this. I guess we can kind of lightly touch on this. I'm going to show you guys in a nutshell how I will answer this question. The question being, how can the younger anti-war left build solidarity with the axis of resistance? And Danny, I want your thoughts on this because we were going to talk about this later. I decided to bring this up a little bit earlier because this is what you don't do if you want to build solidarity with the axis of resistance. And this is exactly why we was not okay with Nina Turner being associated in any way, shape, or form with RBN at all. She is a sellout. I called her out when she ran for election. I was live on Jimmy Dore show. That's when she unfollowed me because she thought we was cool. I was like, nah, we're not cool, bro. The way you moving, not okay. For example, the way she condemned BDS. I want a few people to cover that. She, in order to win over the AIPAC lobby, she said she didn't support boycotts on Israeli businesses that support the Zionist project. So there was a roundabout way of condemning BDS. And then I know, feel free to chime in. I know you want to chime in, but I'll just read this tweet. I want to get your thoughts. And this, I kind of use your super chat, John, as a way to transition to this mini segment. So I appreciate it. I want your response to Nina Turner here, where she's getting dragged and exposed like she should, where she said arrest Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. Danny, any response? We don't spend too much time on it, but I want to get your reaction to this.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising because the ICC left it open. I wasn't surprised by the ICC order to both arrest Netanyahu and add in the Hamas leaders. That's not surprising, and I'm a little less angry about that than people who are supposed to claim. The ICC has never claimed that it is some kind of arbiter for the kind of justice that me, you, and people who watch your show want to see. It doesn't have necessarily a best record in this regard. But when it comes to Nina Turner and people like this, I mean, it just exposes what both it shouldn't be done, as you said. We should not be condemning the acts of resistance of a people that has been so oppressed, so colonized, so stripped of their right to self-determination. That is exactly the opposite of what we should do. But what we should do is the exact opposite. I think the only way that we develop solidarity with resistance movement like which exists in the region of West Asia and beyond, the axis of resistance of Iran and Ansarallah, of Hezbollah, Khatib Hezbollah, the resistance in Syria, etc. The only way we can be of Al-Qassam and the other Palestinian resistance groups, the only way we can express our solidarity is to talk about them differently, because either they're ignored entirely or they're viewed as just a bunch of gun-toting terrorists. I mean, that's been the big problem for the political discourse in the collective West in the United States. I mean, I know you covered, I remember watching this, your coverage of what Tulsi Gabbard had to say about Israel and why Israel is so right and Ukraine is so wrong to be supported, right? It's so right to support Israel, so wrong to support Ukraine. Why? Well, Ukraine's not going through some quote unquote Islamist, jihadist, extremist attacks, right? She was just doing what she has done, to give her credit and to also give myself a self-criticism for maybe overlooking this a bit. She's always had this rhetoric from the very beginning, okay, Islamist jihadists. But at that time, you had the United States supporting literal jihadists in Syria and Libya, etc. So we had this experience of, okay, yeah, there is a difference between, let's say, jihadists supported by NATO in the United States and Syria versus Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, for example. Like those are two completely different things. But not to Tulsi Gabbard and not to the vast majority of those in the political class, even those who claim themselves to be progressive. They view Hamas as evil. They think Hamas is the problem. Oh man, look at what Hamas did on October 7th. This and that, hostages, blah blah blah, right? Like this is the narrative that they have also consumed, because they know if they go any further that AIPAC is going to end their careers. They are much weaker. This is what they don't want to also acknowledge, is they are much weaker than the Israel lobby. They know that they have no support within the political establishment, but they have no faith in the masses of people, because if they did, they would understand that the vast majority of people in the United States and the collective West and the world want to see people actually have a backbone, stand up to the Israel lobby, stand up to those who are pressuring and ultimately controlling in many ways U.S. political campaigns and discourse like that. They want to see that. But Nina Turner, this is the big problem with Democrats. They have no faith in the masses of people, because ultimately they view them as exploited subjects. I mean, they are people to exploit, whether it's for votes or whether at the end of the day it's someone like AOC who, predictions of her becoming another kind of Nancy Pelosi were just so spot on, because now that's who exactly she acts like. She acts like the early Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, nobody remembers, but she actually had, in the beginning of her career, a progressive veneer. She wasn't someone that people in the mid 1990s viewed as some kind of corporate shill. Like, people didn't talk about Nancy Pelosi like that. She was supporting single payer back in the mid 90s, late 90s, when people were talking about single payer before the Bush 2 era. That's who she was. She's from San Francisco. It's a little more liberal, a little more lefty, a little less neoliberal. But I mean, that is a narrative that's been completely dropped. And look how fast people like AOC have dropped their so-called progressive pretenses. And the same goes for Nina Turner in not having the backbone or the spine to just outright and forthrightly support the resistance, support the Palestine solidarity movement. That should be a bare minimum, let alone if you want to go further, which I think we need to do. I think we need to talk about the axis of resistance. I believe we need to counter and fight back against their demonization. Iran, Ansarallah, Hezbollah, Khatib Hezbollah, these aren't evil people. What kind of evil people want to end a genocide? It's a ridiculous assertion. But unfortunately, with all of the long history of not just of U.S. support for Israel, but of course of the U.S. trying to dominate and occupy this part of the world, this is what we're left with. We're left with politicians that are more concerned about their political future, their careers, their ability to win elections under the current arrangement, rather than trying to do something, be some kind of force. If it destroys you in the short term, it destroys you. But that is part of the sacrifice that anyone who has any kind of influence, like these kind of folks do, who claim that they're part of a movement, should be willing to. These are the things that they should be willing to do in order to move things forward in the right direction. So that's my, I guess, my brief reaction to this.
And it's like, this is the kind of shit that irritates me, my friends. Because you guys see that Nina is getting dragged, bro. It got worse since the last time I seen this. It's got, bro, JB, everyone in the RBN family is just dragging her. She getting ratio left and right, and this story is way worse when I saw it originally. Because you guys see this one here, very disappointing. And what do I say on RBN? I don't consider you good on this issue if you condemn Palestinian resistance. So there are people who do good coverage of this. Like Crystal Ball would do good coverage of Israel government, but she condemns Hamas. I don't consider her ally in this fight. It's just that simple. It is that simple. Like, because these people, and I talk to people in the resistance. You guys see the Palestinian Community Network. I have a Palestinian roundtable, another one I'm going to plan here and next week or so. And I got deep contacts with people in the Palestinian resistance movement who I'm more than happy to platform whenever the fuck they hit me up. I tell them anytime. So we got another one planned. When I talk to them, they said the people who irritate them the most are the people who have solidarity with their corpse, but not with their rockets.
Yeah.
Let me repeat. And
yes.
And this is not my quote. I got this directly from them.
Mm-hmm.
They hate the people who have solidarity with their corpse. With a dead Palestinian children, they had solidarity with them, but they won't have solidarity with their rockets, with their ability to resist. And the reason why this is extremely dangerous and why the left must resist this, because the only reason Nina Turner comes to this conclusion is because she's an institutionalist who believes that Palestinian resistance should come through the lens of institutions. That's not how South Africa was liberated. That's not how liberation movement works. It's the professional managerial class being purposely dense. Hamas has the legal right to engage in anti-colonial struggle, period. End of story. What Hamas did was engage in successful anti-colonial resistance. So what these people will say is, oh, we believe that Palestinians should be liberated, but they can't be too successful at it. October 7th was too successful. You guys are too good at killing IDF soldiers. Let them win. So that's why Nina Turner wants them prosecuted. Nina Turner wants Hamas leaders prosecuted because they led to a Palestinian resistance victory. They are the biggest scum. And this is what I learned from my Palestinian brothers and sisters. This is not me. The same way I want people to learn about Black liberation from me and my friends and family, the same way I learned about Palestinians from them. I don't make this shit up. It comes directly from them. That's why she's getting dragged. And this is another response. And feel free to cut me off if you want to, Danny, at any time. But here's Nina Turner. The ICC process should play out in the court. As Israel don't give a fuck about international law. How many people have been slaughtered since the ICJ ruling about Rafah? He said, and we should respect that. I support Palestinian liberation. This is not an unreasonable position. So I support Palestinian liberation as long as they're unsuccessful. If they become too successful, then I will condemn them. You should lock them up. Now, one thing I want to add, anything you want to add, Danny? I'll pass it to you. Anything you want to add real quick?
Well, one thing about this that maybe isn't getting attention, or maybe it is in the back of people's minds as they're reacting, rightfully so, angrily at what Nina Turner is saying here, is that if we are to just take on face value this notion of letting the court do its job, well, then we should actually be pushing back even harder against the notion that Hamas leaders should be arrested, because right now Hamas isn't the one that's on trial here. It actually is Israel is the one that has a standing indictment, a standing investigation into whether it has committed genocide in Gaza or not. And so that is the process. If there's any court procedure that should be allowed to be allowed to stand, it's that one. This here is, regardless of the reactions from Israel and the United States, which were very, very, very hostile to Netanyahu being, you know, lumped in with Hamas for arrest. For our purposes, it actually isn't as helpful as we may think, because it does make this false equivalency. And this point that you made too, it always frustrates me when it comes to the so-called left. This idea that an oppressed people deserve solidarity when they're at their weakest, when they're at their most vulnerable, when they're at their most humiliated position, versus when they are fighting back, when they're in a stronger position, when they are winning. This is most, I believe, visible, most apparent when we're talking about liberation movements that have won, whether it's in China, whether it was the Soviet Union before that, whether it's the various governments on the African continent, Libya, whether we're talking pre-2011, whether we're talking about Syria today, whether we're talking about Iran, right? These are all countries that have had liberation movements that have won. And so these end up being the countries that have been the most vilified and demonized. And of course, the same was even true in Iraq, or whatever we thought, Saddam Hussein, all this. There's plenty of reasons to have been critical of Saddam Hussein, but the Iraq, the system that existed in Iraq for many, many years, while it wasn't perfect, it was also the product of a larger pan-Arab movement, an Arab nationalist movement that was progressive on its face, was about the liberation of the Arab world from the Sykes-Picot colonial arrangements of the late 19th century, early 20th century. And so all of that is to say is that it just so happens that the United States, the empire, the collective West, they're always looking to overturn and destroy these governments, and of course the movements that maybe haven't won. But when they are succeeding, that is when the punishment, the warfare, the terrorism, the now we're seeing a genocide. This genocide is punishment to the Palestinian resistance for taking such a bold move and being very effective in doing so. And so it is incredibly frustrating to watch liberals, to watch so-called leftists play this false equivalency, play along with this false equivalency, and allow themselves to become kind of useless arbiters of it, because you become essentially rendered useless when you do not take a firm stance on the side of the oppressed. If this is people who are on the outside of this question, really, you don't have the luxury. You shouldn't have the luxury to say, well, Hamas is bad too. You just don't have that luxury, because there's only one people here that are sacrificing literally everything to win their liberation. That's the Palestinian people. So you should probably listen to them.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And you see she being cooked, and this is why it's frustrating, because I've seen a few clips of Nina giving speeches about Palestine, her tweets, and these people get tricked by these progressives all the time. That's why it's frustrating. And that's why she's getting dragged so hard, because there's a lot of these people, and let me see if I can find that one that's disappointing. There are a lot of people like, oh my God, I can't believe Nina is selling us. No, she always been this way, guys. This is what the professional managerial class does. And they always go through this process when people realize, oh man, they're not really about it. They know what's popular. She's a politician. She's a politician in aspiration. She knows that standing for Palestine is the popular position if you want to pretend to be progressive. But then I look at what really draws us, what will make you real and will make you fake. And what will make you real and will make you fake, as far as I'm concerned, is whether you support the liberation of the Palestinian people against these terrorist Zionist thugs at all costs. Now, I'm trying to be as quick as possible. We're going to wrap up here soon. But the reason why I explained many times in a human humanizing these people. I know Americans struggle to humanize other people, because not only does Hamas have the intellectual right to defend themselves, the legal right to defend themselves, but if you boil it down to humanity purposes, I explained many times before, if I'm gonna think about the people in my family, you guys know a lot, like my niece, for example. My niece, I posted a video of me training my niece in Muay Thai on Twitter. You guys seen her? Literally the joy of my life. If there was a hostile foreign government that did to my niece what I have seen done to these Palestinian children, sign me up to Hamas or whoever the fuck is down to do whatever. Like, just the thought. I'm like, imagine my niece, imagine my younger cousins, my brother, he has a son. Like, imagine these people getting just bombed. And then they're like, oops, sorry, we bombed the family. Nigga, I will sign up to Hamas the next day. What are you talking about? You want to condemn them? I'll be like, nigga, Hamas is too moderate from what I want to do. Imagine if you had, because I have an older mother. I have a lot of seniors in my family. Imagine if your mother, your aunt, your grandmother was forcibly evicted from their home at gunpoint. You tell me you as a man wouldn't be down to join Hamas? What kind of man are you if you wouldn't be down to join Hamas after that? And what kind of man will you be if you wouldn't want to defend your community against these terrorists? I just got 2 examples. I can show you guys 1,000 of these. And the reason why do I not only refuse to condemn Hamas, I root unapologetically for Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansarullah because they're fighting monsters. The same way I would root for the Red Army against the Nazis. The same way you root for anyone fighting the Nazis. Listen to this video and tell me why you would condemn anyone fighting this guy. So I just play it.
IDF fighting the Hamas or the Hamas?
No, we don't. We kill everybody. No Hamas.
He said if you can't understand the accent, we kill everyone, not just Hamas.
Everybody.
Yes.
Even the children.
And the children.
The women.
Children and babies. Baby, one day we kill him.
On the first day it's born.
Yes.
Why
no?
How many do you have? How many kills do you have?
Watch this, Danny. This is crazy.
1 minute. Because I don't English.
So he can't speak English that well. So he asked how many people this person killed. This shit is literally crazy. Even if he's lying, half the number that he about to show you on the screen is still the craziest thing you ever heard.
Good.
You guys see that? He said we kill everyone, children, babies, everyone. When asked how many people he killed, he said 20,000. I saw you on mute, Dane. So do you want to chime in?
Oh no, I was just
yeah.
I mean, there's so much you could say about this level of barbarism. I would highly doubt. I mean, I'm just looking at this Zionist scum, and I'm not getting vibes of 20. I'm not getting 20,000 vibes.
What does that say about that he would even say that? You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. But this just shows the barbar. This is how pathetic they are, though. Because if my initial reaction is not only are you BSing, but I don't think you could hold your own against the Palestinian resistance. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen the videos, Nick. I think we've seen. Maybe much of your audience has also seen the Al-Qassam video journalism that they've been doing of their fighting. So while surely this literal scum has probably been involved in operations that have been, he could definitely be involved in operations that have been killing that number of Palestinians. This just goes to show that you have video footage of this, but you don't have video footage of the IDF fighting on the ground in this urban warfare situation in any kind of way that looks superior and strong. Yeah. You don't see them going toe to toe on video. They have smartphone. Hell, they have a lot of they have the ability. They always have the thirst trap videos and the weird propaganda videos. They have the money to basically during the NBA playoffs, every other commercial is, Israel, anti-Semitism. You see it all the time. In our media. They have the money, they have the technology. Mossad, come on, Mossad is one of the most sophisticated surveillance intelligence organizations. And when it comes to surveillance, they have the ability to definitely gather and garner footage of what's happening. They don't want to show us, and the reason is because when they actually do have to fight, when they're not just bombing and terrorizing Palestinians who are not involved in the armed wing of the resistance. They're just Palestinian people who are living their lives. That's who they can terrorize with their technology and their weapons. But when it comes to actually fighting, they don't stand a chance. And they know this. They talk like this because they believe they have immunity. They believe that they are superior. They believe that everyone that surrounds them, that they've occupied, that they've terrorized, that they're inferior. But at the end of the day, this is just barbarism. I mean, it is looking at scum. It's watching scum every single day, and these are the people that we are told, right? Because we're always said, oh well, what about the Israelis? What about the Israelis? And unfortunately, while you could probably say in the United States, if we were to maybe address the question of settler colonialism, there probably are like a lot of people in the United States who don't really subscribe to that. They wouldn't say, if you ask them, hey, are you for, hey, do you remember this is the indigenous nation that used to live here? Do you like agree with this process? Do you want things to change? I'm sure a good number of people would say, oh, well, I think it's reasonable to, give people some justice. Give indigenous people. This is not how Israelis think. They are the kind of last. They're like the last of the settler colonialists of a different era. They think most 90+% of Israelis right now are either just okay with what's happening or want an even harsher and even more genocidal posture. I did.
You see that poll where only like 4% of Israelis believe that Israel bombed Gaza too much?
Yeah,
and people pretend that Netanyahu is a unique evil.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reality. So and it's a reality that is shaped by politics. It's shaped by the ways in which Israel has been developed as this entity. The region, the Axis of Resistance calls it the Zionist entity. They don't acknowledge Israel proper, but this Zionist colonial entity. This is how they've been able to do what they do. Because if there was divisions about this, right, they're not at the historical stage, and they'll never will be. I mean, this genocide, this war, this really is the beginning of the end of Israel. We can see all the signs. So it's not going to flourish like the United States, right? There's not going to be some burgeoning consolidation for Israel inside of West Asia. The only path forward for Israel is the end of Israel, really, because unless the situation changes dramatically in the political sense, there's no shadow of a doubt that the Axis of Resistance will eventually end up in a cataclysmic conflict with this regime. And I don't believe that this regime can really survive that, because I don't believe that it would be restrained to just the region, and therefore everything will change after that. And so if that is the trajectory forward, then yes, people, these barbarous scum that we have the unfortunate we have unfortunate encounters with on social media. We watch these awful videos of how they talk. Truly, we are looking at just the worst that humanity has to offer, and we're also looking at the probably the end of this kind of regime. As much as it is hard to envision now, I just don't see this kind of social and political and economic order standing for much longer after such a thing like what we've witnessed since October 2023 runs its course.
And I'm gonna try to train myself to stop saying Israel in general and say the Zionist entity. That's a good idea, because I hear a lot of people say that, and I'm gonna just stop saying Israel, because you gotta remember what our dear sister Josana used to say back when we had the Nick and Josana show, when she said Israel. I'll call it Israel because Israel is not real. Like around the world, they don't acknowledge Israel. And then maybe I need to stop saying it, and that's what I'm gonna try to work on. I'm gonna just not even say the word no more. I'll just say the Zionist entity. And I think that's more accurate, to be honest, because the Zionist entity is the UK, Germany, the United States own Congress. And now what I'm gonna do right now, because I actually got a ton of cover and we're about to wrap up. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go super rapid fire, as I can, and then I'm gonna pass it to you at the end, and we begin to wrap up, because I appreciate your time, and we can do this all day, so we definitely gotta have you back. So let me go back a little bit, because my original point, I'm gonna show you. I show you guys that guy's video, kind of in response to the Nina segment as well, because you guys see how Nina make the false equivalency between Hamas and Israel, or the Zionist entity. I despise that, because even the worst interpretation of Hamas doesn't line up with Israel. the worst interpretation of Hamas does not murder and execute the entire family of their enemies. So the interpretation of Hamas that the West has is that Hamas indiscriminately kills civilians. But what Israel does, they purposely wait till people go home and murder their entire family. Does Hamas have concentration camps, or does Israel does? So the point I am making is, if you're fighting someone as evil as a Zionist entity that engage in activities like this, I will root for them, period. Look at this tweet here. And I get in trouble with this narrative. People push back on me, and I think it's fair to push back at me when I say that, when I talk about this. I had a great conversation with Lion Cosgrove. We had a great narrative about this. We had a great dialogue about this, because I really struggle with the concept of an Israeli citizen. I really do. Because look at this. Since the early morning of Jabalia refugee camp, we have retrieved around 70 decomposed bodies. Most of them were children and women who were killed by Israeli snipers attempting to flee the camp. So the Zionist army, like that psychopath, when we can acknowledge that his number is bullshit, but how many of these videos have we seen, Danny? They're just bragging about children they killed, snipers killing women. So, Danny, what people have you believe is that when these people retire from the IDF, that they're now civilians? Remember, in Israel, everyone is forced to join the IDF. And I'm smart, guys. I'm not talking about going after the people who go into prison because they refuse the IDF. Not to go after the religious people in Israel that refuse take religious. I think there's a exception you can take that some do. Like if you are hyper religious, you can take an exception. So I'm not talking about those people. But in Israel, everyone has to serve the IDF, and I think the second you serve the IDF, you are a fair target. There's no such thing as an Israeli citizen, as far as I'm concerned, over the age of 18. Once you sign up to the IDF, once you don't get that dishonorable discharge, you are fair game. And I understand why people want to put back at that, but I see these fucking terrorists. Like, if you take part in the sniping of children, you are no longer get the right to call yourself a civilian for the rest of your life. That's my position. Let me move on, dude. I'll pass it to you for a second time. I'm gonna try to go through some rapid fire stuff. Because we're gonna wrap up here very soon. Here, look, you guys see what the media, how they're twisting the terrorists. Like, that's not even a strong enough word to use, to be honest. Like, Nazi genocidal scum. We covered the concentration camp, and look how Associated Press covers it. Calls it a shadowy hospital. Once again, going rapid fire. I'm gonna pass you to you at the end here. One more thing I'm gonna cover, and I'll literally wrap it up here. This will be the last thing. I'm trying to get as much as we can this episode. Last thing I'll cover to show you guys the absolute barbarism of the Biden administration, as people talking about the Trump trials, because he paid off a porn star. Then they trying to turn to a felony because he's trying to overturn the election because he didn't want his family to know he paid a porn star. So as America is pretending this is the biggest fucking thing ever, the biggest controversy ever, Trump paying a porn star, you have this, which this alone, Danny, should be enough to get someone impeached in a rational society. This will be enough to start like Nuremberg trials. Listen to this, and I think I'll pull this one up because it sums it up quickly, and I'll pass it to you. I'm just trying to get a lot done at the end here. U.S. State Department falsified report absolving Israel on Gaza aid. Now, I did a hotspot video about this as well, because you guys know I'm popping out banger after banger. Well, I covered how one of the people who quit the Biden administration quit because they work for USAID, and they blew the whistle on the Biden administration, falsifying reports about Israel letting aid into Gaza. And how many times, Danny, I know you've seen it, how many times did we see John Kirby, Biden, any of these spokespeople say, oh, Israel's doing everything they can to let aid in? The fact that you guys built a fucking failure of a pier, and the fact that you guys had to airdrop aid alone just proved that fact. So I had a lot said there because I wanted to get some headlines I definitely wanted to cover. So we're near the end there, Danny. I'll pass it to you for your overall thought. I know you got a lot of bounce on there, but any last thoughts before we begin to wrap up, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, this entire, everything that you showed in those headlines, it there's just such a massive web of criminality that the United States is completely just imbued with regard to what's happening in Gaza. The United States, this has been, I think, just an increasingly apparent reality that the United States is not just aiding the genocide, but it is a full party. It is, if we think about Israel committing genocide, we really have to say the U.S. and Israel, or the U.S. dash Israel, however you'd want to say it or write it. It is truly blood all over the United States' hands, and in particular the Biden administration's hands, and to the attempts to cover up the U.S. is not failures, but the U.S. is willing and complicit actions, looking away from allowing Israel to essentially do whatever it wants with U.S. weapons and U.S. Intelligence and U.S. personnel to have Israel treat the United States as it has during this conflict, because ultimately Israel is just so important to U.S. interests. I love to remind people of Joe Biden when he was talking to the Senate in 1986, where he's talking to Congress. He said that if Israel did not exist, the United States would have to create one in order to protect the U.S.'s national interests in the region. That is literally what, and it just so happens that Joe Biden is the top recipient of AIPAC money in the history of politicians receiving
What a
AIPAC
coincidence.
donation. What a coincidence. He just happens
He
to be
becomes
the
president.
president.
Surely it's a coincidence.
He becomes he becomes president. Palestine decides to break out of prison, and then Israel is allowed to commit a genocide with U.S. help. So
I like that. I like the way you phrase it. I like the way I heard you say it on your show before. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna steal that because that's a great way to put it. Palestine broke out of prison.
Yeah.
Well said. Go ahead, Danny.
So that, all of this is to say is that it always reminds me too of when the United States they're still pushing this. I saw a Newsweek, Gordon Chang, the coming collapse of China, this absolute fraud who has been propped up by the most heinously overfunded, just clownish right-wing NGO sphere, Gordon Chang. This
I showed you
absolute
guys
clown.
a few Jordan Chang segments. I decided to stop doing them. He's so absurd. Yeah. This guy has been predicting the fall of China for 20 years.
He recently wrote in Newsweek that the United States, by doing nothing against China, is helping China commit its genocide against Uyghurs. Meanwhile, and Newsweek published this thing. Newsweek published an article, while a literal genocide, one that is verifiable, documented. Literally, there's a case in the ICJ investigating this. And you have Gordon Chang talking about a mythical, completely, totally falsified claim of genocide against China. So this is just how low the United States has gone to maintain its supremacy. And the whole world is now seeing this. The whole world is watching. This is why you have even the most corrupt, the most untrustworthy, the most pariah states in many senses moving toward a multipolar world themselves, right? Because they are seeing that if they don't diversify their portfolio, they're going to go down in the explosion that the United States is spreading across the world. That is why you have Saudi Arabia doing all kinds of twists and turns and cartwheels to try to balance its relationship with the United States and grow a relationship with Russia, China, with BRICS. That's why you see even India. This is a country, I was just watching video today. It's so funny when they say, China and India's catching up. Look at India's growth numbers. 65% of people in India don't even have water in their homes. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous to try to compare China with India. Most people in India don't have running sewage system where they can defecate into. That is nothing like China, where they talk about toilet revolutions and basically China is the home of the highest and most innovative technology and development that exists on this planet. So it's just hilarious to think this. But even India, countries like India with very hostile regimes to China. India wants to, if it can, huddle under the U.S. orbit. But even India, because of the sanctions on Russia, because of which way the wind is actually blowing in the world, has had to get closer to Russia and has had to also make moves to settle things, especially on the border with China. So all of this is to say is that even these countries which are not to be trusted, which have a lot of problems, which you couldn't say are part of the engine of multipolarity, they have to now make a decision about what they're going to do in their future. And I think that Gaza is another one of these big historical questions, these kind of epical shifts in the world, because a lot of people, Sabby asked me, okay, what do you think about European countries and these countries that are now stating that they stand with for a Palestinian state? They're reiterating support for a two-state solution. Well, it's significant. I do think the most significant part about this will likely be one, the strengthening of the axis of resistance and their increased role in a multipolar world, and two, it will be the rest of the world that is on the fence, that has maybe a lot of, unfortunately, chains around their neck, their arms, their legs, to the U.S. and Western financial, economic, and political world order. They're also going to look at this as another signal. It's like, well, if Russia, the sanctions, NATO encroachment, all this wasn't a signal that there's trouble afoot in the world order, well, allowing a genocide to stand as another flashpoint for World War III develops in West Asia, all of that, and let alone all of the machinations that the U.S. is trying to stir up in the Asia Pacific. If we just look at these two areas, Ukraine and Gaza, I mean, the rest of the world is looking at this with utter horror, and that means a lot more people are thinking about how can they join in on an alternative way of developing, a way of running and building the future in the world that we want to see. And I think that's truly going to be the consequences of all of this.
It's always great to have you on, Danny. Our conversation is always very thought-provoking. There's so many things we didn't touch on, but there's always time for another day. One last thing I will show you guys. Didn't ask us to do a segment on this, but I will bring it to your attention because it's so absurd. So the guy who got the ICC arrest warrant on him, the butcher of Gaza, one of the most horrific war criminals of my lifetime, invited to Congress, signed by all the top, it is bipartisan, the top 4 congressional leaders, all of them signed this letter. And I want you guys to vomit with me because I just skimmed this and I want to fucking vomit. His Excellency, Benjamin Netanyahu. I know how they always talk, but how does that not immediately disturb everybody? And I'll just read the first 2 paragraphs. I'll move on because I do want to bring this to your guys' attention. Last year, Congress was proud to host Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Washington to celebrate. Actually, let me close this. It's very easier to read like this. To celebrate 75 years of friendship and partnership between our two democracies. Hey, Democrats, the Democrats that signed this letter? I thought our democracy was at risk. Anyway, I want to be brief on this. Less than 3 months later, the horrific attacks on October 7th shocked the world and forced your nation into a fight for its very existence. We join the state of Israel in your struggle against terror. Oh, Jesus Christ. Especially as Hamas continue to hold American and Israeli citizens captives. Oh, I can't finish this. This is horrible. Anyway, I may cover this more in detail this week. For a second time, I'll move on. If you do one time on this, we about to wrap up. Big shout out to Rome. Big shout out to Sabby. Anything else you want to add, Danny, before we begin to wrap up here? Check your audio, Danny.
Sorry about that. No, I mean, there's again, yeah, as you said, there's so much that we can cover. This moment is just one example after another of the United States looking as it truly is, right? It's the mask off moment that we're always talking about. And the United States never really has any shortage of those when it comes to its foreign policy. But this is one example that people simply can't turn away from. And we live in an era now, and I was actually in Vietnam when this started. I actually had Ali Abu Nima right as October 7th, Operation Al Aqsa Flood jumped off. And I was lucky enough to be able to get him on to talk about Al Aqsa Flood. But then I was in Vietnam as the literal genocide began. And I just remember when I would get onto Twitter when I had time and I would just look at what was being posted. And I'm like, this is just different. Like the way that people are reacting to this, how urgent it is, how accessible this content is becoming, how people can literally watch this genocide happen in real time. That is something that really hasn't happened, arguably, since the US invasion of Vietnam, when a lot of people credit the changed public sentiment to the ability to access information via television, because there were actually war journalists. I went to a museum in Vietnam where you could see, it's called the War Remnants Museum. And in that museum, you can actually see there's a whole exhibit on the war journalists. This doesn't exist anymore. There aren't any real war journalists anymore. They're just embedded stenographers. But we are seeing that kind of happening again. So we can thank the Palestinian resistance really for this, because it's them who made it possible. They were the ones who started the prison break, who committed and engaged in one of the most effective acts of resistance in recent history. And then that led to such a harsh response, which I believe that we cannot I don't think, you know, I read Al Mayadeen, I try to read news from the region, and if you do read it, you see that there is no like, oh my God, Israel's doing this, right? Like, I think everyone understood who was engaged in the resistance, both in the axis of resistance and in the Palestinian resistance as one of its one of its branches. They all understood that Israel's response was going to be incredibly bloody, incredibly brutal, and they did it anyway. And the reason why is because this was a calculated sacrifice to move the Palestinian cause forward. And in that sense, this has been a resounding victory for Palestine, even amid the massive suffering. This is the contradiction. I'm every time I talk about it now, this is what I'm going to bring up, because this is the contradiction I think people outside of Palestine, people outside of the region, right? Ansar Allah, for example, Iran, Iraq, these parts of the resistance know what genocidal behavior is like. I mean, look at what Iraq had to experience for, into today with since the U.S. Began to slaughter people there, starting in the first Iraq War. Iran has a long history of U.S. subversion, Israeli subversion, and the U.S. had a huge hand in the Iran-Iraq War. Covertly, and we can go on and on and on. Yemen has been through its own genocide, so people understand in the ICC resistance what genocidal behavior is, what the consequences of that are. The Palestinian resistance, I believe, understood all the same, and they did it anyway because it was the cause that was most important. And this is something that's hard for even the most progressive, even the most left, even the most supportive people of the Palestinian cause to understand. And I believe it is why it is so hard. It is one of the big reasons why it is so hard to pierce this demonization of Hamas, of Al-Qassam, of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, of the various resistance forces. It's because they're viewed as having somewhat of a hand to play in the cataclysmic situation that Palestinian people have found themselves in. But I don't believe the resistance for a second thought that Israel's response was going to be any more tame than it has been, because it was so successful. And I believe they thought it was going to be successful. I mean, we saw the footage on October 7th, October 8th. I mean, it was an absolutely humiliating moment. They completely undermined everything that Israel thought it had built, thought they had won over the course of many decades. And then now the humiliation is only, in my opinion, grown, because while Israel can tout that they've killed so many people, they cannot tout that they've done anything to stymie the resistance. They're still fighting in the north. They're still fighting in the center of the strip. They're still fighting. They're going to fight in Rafah. They're going to fight in these places indefinitely. So it really is going to be this protracted struggle, this protracted resistance. And I don't think it can win. I don't think the U.S. can change the situation. The axis of resistance has only gotten stronger the more and more the U.S. has pushed over the years, the more and more Israel has pushed. And now this is kind of a domino situation. Can Israel really withstand this kind of both public relations blunder, as well as a military defeat, as well as the fact that it does not have the capacity, short of nuclear Armageddon, to weaken the very forces that are in solidarity with Palestine? Palestine will never die. This is the problem that Israel is facing. You cannot kill a resistance movement. You cannot kill people. You just can't do it. It's never happened. You've never been able to. This is just not how social relations work. This isn't how human history works. This isn't how it really works. You know, you can kill, but eventually, just like the Vietnamese, just like Afghanistan, eventually the dominoes end up falling, and they don't fall on the side of the oppressor, and that's what we're seeing. So it's a really historic moment. On the one hand, exciting, on the other, incredibly grueling. And so, you know, I guess I would just say to people out there who are involved, who are paying attention to this, who are giving whatever they can in solidarity to the Palestinians and the global cause of peace, it's a long war. And so, you know, whatever we can do to stay in it for the long haul is important.